Are we not eating tonight? Myanmar's military junta accused of using hunger as a weapon by blocking vital food aid. Hin Marcho worries for her 4-year-old son as she struggles to scrape together enough food to feed him in a makeshift displacement camp at a crowded monastery in western Myanmar. Soldiers had stormed their village of Bayin Phaya, Rakhine State, and forced her and other family members out of their homes. They detained all the men and shot her brother and other neighbors, she said. Survivors like Kin Marcho fled to the monastery just outside the regional capital Sitwe. There, a lone monk is struggling to feed about 300 people who have sought refuge inside the camp as a 3-year civil war intensifies around them, waged by Myanmar's military junta against an armed resistance. There are days that we have no food, even though we are hungry, Kin Marcho said. I cannot feed my kid anything more than meals donated by people because I don't have a job or income, and all the male family members have been taken away. Disturbing accounts from multiple aid workers suggest hunger is being used as a weapon of war in Rakhine State. The junta is preventing aid from reaching desperate people by imposing checkpoints, blocking roads and waterways, and refusing to issue access permits to humanitarian groups, multiple senior United Nations officials, and local and international aid workers in Rakhine told CNN on condition of anonymity because most weren't authorized to speak. Rakhine has become a focal point of the conflict, where a powerful ethnic minority armed rebel group, the Arakan Army, AA, which is accused of human rights abuses, has seized control of at least 10 of the state's townships since a year-long ceasefire with the military collapsed in November. The aid officials said the junta is trying to starve civilians in AA-held territory, using tactics that have repeatedly been described as war crimes and crimes against humanity by UN officials and rights groups. They are using food as a weapon, a senior aid official told CNN. That much is clear. In a statement to CNN, Myint Kyo, Deputy Permanent Secretary for Myanmar's Ministry of Information, alleged rebel groups, not the junta, are restricting people's access to territories they control. The Myanmar government is committed to the equality of all citizens, the statement said. Every citizen has the right to travel freely without any restrictions. Aid workers say they don't know the full extent of the suffering due to telecoms and internet blocks coupled with restrictions on access to affected areas. But they say the crisis is acute. The situation unfolding across the country is desperate, but in Rakhine, which is almost entirely dependent on food aid, the UN says that fewer than a quarter of the 873,000 people who need food assistance have received it. There is a very real possibility that the most vulnerable may die if they do not receive support, UN report warned in June. It is now August, and the situation has deteriorated. Displaced residents in Rakhine told CNN they are growing increasingly desperate as they and their families struggle to cope with escalating violence and dwindling supplies of food and medicine. Prices for basic staples, like rice, fuel and cooking oil, have skyrocketed partly due to shortages created by the junta's control of supply routes north from Myanmar's largest city, Yangon, aid officials said. Requests to transport goods, including food, into the region are being refused, they added. Meanwhile, food production in the state has plummeted, with farmers predicting a 50% drop in this year's rice harvest, independent Myanmar news outlet the Irrawaddy reported. Mohammed, a 43-year-old father of 3, has lived in a displacement camp with his family in Sitwe since 2012, when anti-Muslim violence forced tens of thousands of people from their homes. The latest fighting has not yet reached Sitwe, which the junta still controls. But since the collapse of the ceasefire deal between the AA and the military in November opened a major new front in Myanmar's civil war, the camp has been all but cut off and conditions have drastically deteriorated, he said. Mohammed's children attend a small, makeshift school within the camp, but he says it's difficult to nurture their dreams when he can only feed them half a bowl of rice. My children would cry and ask, "We not eating tonight?" In those moments, feeling desperate, I would go to a neighbor and ask for some food to feed our children, Mohammed told Partners Relief and Development, an aid NGO. Yet his neighbors are hungry too, and they have little to spare. Access denied. Shayna Borchner, a researcher at Human Rights Watch, told CNN the junta is obstructing aid deliveries in Rakhine by blocking roads and waterways, seizing relief cargoes, and confiscating medical supplies. As the conflict has spread around Rakhine, we've also seen the destruction of roadways and bridges, she said. The result is, basically, no one has access to these places. Aid groups, including UN agencies, must get travel authorizations from the state government, which reports to the ruling military council, before they can access territory that the junta considers travel-restricted areas, according to aid officials. In February, the junta stopped issuing nearly all travel authorizations to contested or rebel-controlled territory in the state, most of which are in northern Rakhine, according to 7 aid officials with direct knowledge of the matter, all of whom requested anonymity. Without the travel authorizations, it's impossible to pass through the junta's road and waterway blockades, they said. One senior aid official said, "It is difficult to negotiate because the SAC does not want assistance to go to non-SAC controlled areas," referring to the State Administration Council, the official name of the junta government. In May, some aid agencies received travel authorizations for Sitwe when the junta allowed them to begin transporting supplies from Yangon. 2 cargo vessels carrying rice and basic medicine arrived in Sitwe 2 months later. But some items such as solar lights, hygiene, and newborn kits remained held up, OCHA reported in August. Teams still can't access the surrounding townships or areas further afield. No official travel authorization has been granted to humanitarian partners to implement activities outside of Sitwe Township since November 2023, a senior aid official told C. Seeking to broker an end to the blockade, representatives from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, held informal talks with senior junta officials last month in the country's capital, 2 sources told CNN. The UN aid officials made clear in their meetings, which have not been previously reported, that the status quo is unacceptable, the sources said. Separately, the 2 officials said the agency has raised the issue with the UN Security Council, the European Union and China, among others. The junta told humanitarian groups that it cut their access to AA territory because aid workers cannot safely travel through areas the military does not control, sources told CNN. But that's a lame excuse, said a senior aid official. We don't need the junta to cover for our security. Local aid workers caught trying to deliver food and supplies in junta-controlled territory without a permit have also been arrested, those on the ground told CNN. Aid workers and officials say the junta's blockade is part of a wider war strategy long used by the military, designed to chip away at the rebel group's popular support by cutting off food, water, and medical care to the civilian population. Borchner, the Human Rights Watch researcher, said the blockades are deliberate and they are intended to harm the population in what is an apparent war crime. Myung Kyo of the junta's information ministry said humanitarian groups are being allowed to go to safe areas after completing a verification process and alleged, without evidence, that rebel groups are blocking aid deliveries. In the statement, the junta linked instability in the region to armed groups allegedly engaging in online gambling, planting and selling illegal drugs, human trafficking, online scams and illegal weapons deliveries to terrorist groups in rebel-controlled areas. Ijaz, a local aid official who works in northern Rakhine, said the junta is punishing civilians collectively by blocking most food and medicine imports. Even the limited food that is available in the state is prohibitively expensive to most, largely thanks to blockade-induced inflation, he said. People are surviving on the bare minimum, like rice and salt, said Ijaz, who asked to be identified by a pseudonym for his safety. I've seen it with my own eyes. War and hunger. Many of the displaced in Rakhine are members of the stateless Rohingya minority, who have been persecuted for decades in a country that denies them citizenship. Jamila, 26, a former resident of the predominantly Rohingya town of Buthadong, close to the Bangladesh border, said the community recently suffered food shortages for at least 6 months due to the fighting. No one came to give us food. The junta blocks all roads. They block all aid trucks, said Jamila, who goes by one name and spoke to CNN from a refugee camp in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, where her family recently fled. Many shops were looted by fighters and soldiers, she said, and those still open could only get supplies by smuggling them at high prices across the border from Bangladesh. Food supplies were also strained as droves of displaced people from surrounding villages fled to Buthidong to escape fighting and landmines. Everyone was helping everyone, she said. I lived life with risk and hunger. With little food and no medicine, Jamila said her children suffered from diarrhea and vomiting. I am suffering from allergies. My whole body is full of itching. But there is no medicine, no treatment, she said. In late May, the Arakan army said it seized Buthidong. Activists and relatives of residents accused AA soldiers of extrajudicial killings, torching and looting Rohingya neighborhoods, and forcing thousands of people to flee. Jamila said fighters stormed her village, drenching her home in petrol and setting it on fire while she and her family were still inside. As the flames consumed their home, they scrambled to grab what belongings they could salvage, but only those on the ground floor had time to flee. Her parents-in-law, asleep in their beds upstairs, did not make it out. They had no time to mourn. As they ran to escape their village, the howl of gunfire rang out, and a bullet pierced her younger brother. He did not survive. We didn't try to save him, Jamila said. We were hearing the screams of people, the cries of children. She walked for 6 days to reach Bangladesh, saying, we lived by eating banana leaves and drinking pond water. In a statement, the AA denied it torched Buthidong, saying it adheres to its principle of fighting under the military code of conduct and never targets non-military objects. Earlier this month, the AA was accused of killing Rohingya people in drone strikes and artillery fire as villagers fled the nearby town of Maungdaw. It denied involvement and blamed the deaths on the Myanmar military and allied Rohingya armed groups. Default text. Reached out for comment to the AA and the Humanitarian and Development Coordination Office, HDCO, of the United League of Arakan, ULA, the AA's political wing. In a statement to CNN, the HDCO said there are about 590,000 people displaced in Rakhine State, according to their data, but civil society organizations are only reaching 20 to 30% of conflict-affected people. Emergency responses are extremely slow. The ULA government, including HDCO, is making every effort to provide food, shelter, water, and healthcare with the limited resources available, it said. The primary challenge remains the acute shortage of essential supplies, including food, non-food items, medicines, medical equipment, women's dignity kits, agricultural products, seeds, and fuel. The HDCO, which said its primary focus is on data collection, emergency response, monitoring aid requirements and tracking aid distribution, said junta blockades and risk of aerial bombardments means there are instances where we are unable to reach those in need.